Aloha nerds and welcome back to TheSalawag's Why It's Great Gut Reaction. I am your host, TheSalawag, and on this show I watch things and react from the gut. I have elected to do an Alan Watts impersonation because I felt it was more entertaining for how pretentious I'm about to be. Not to say that Alan Watts is pretentious, I really have not decided yet, but he sounds brilliant and I really appreciate his perspective. And with that in mind, I will continue this review in my terrible Alan Watts impersonation. X-Men Days of Future Past. This is a spoiler-full review, but for those who don't know and those who have not seen it, X-Men Days of Future Past takes place after the events of X-Men First Class. This film takes place during the 70s, after the Vietnam War has ended. During this time, Oliver Trask is attempting to build his Sentinel Army and build his business detecting mutants and snuffing them out. We have a parallel storyline that takes place in the future in which the Sentinels have evolved to such technological superiority they can absorb the powers of mutants they come into contact with and are actively hunting them throughout the planet. In fact, we are in a post-apocalyptic world in which the Sentinels have done far too good of a job and all that's left are powerful dickheads who are fucking over the world. Awful. Awful. It seems like we're on our way already. Oh my god. So, I really appreciate this film, again, for its finale, but I think that this film overall has very strong character work in it. I remember initially my reaction to this film, I was a bit jaded with Wolverine being the main character of so many films. It's like, come on Marvel, there's so many characters, how about you just focus on one of them? But in retrospect, watching this film again, I appreciate Wolverine being... He's not necessarily the main character. He is, in many ways, the hero who leads the story. But the main character, the main emotional focus of the story is actually Charles Xavier in the 70s. Wolverine must go back in time to convince Charles and Magneto to team up, to convince Mystique not to kill Oliver Trask. And unfortunately, with the baggage of X-Men First Class, and with years of losing students to the Vietnam War, Professor X has dissolved into becoming a junkie. His school is gone, and he lives alone with Beast in what appears to be a platonic relationship. But also a platonic drug pusher relationship, because Beast is totally pushing his drug on Professor X, hence funding his scientific experiments.
I added a little extra because you missed a dose.
That's a little odd. That's a little weird. You're an enabler, Beast. 70s Beast is an enabler, let that be known. I appreciate Professor X's journey in this film. Professor X is not perfect at the beginning of this movie. He's running from his problems. He's addicted to his drugs. He's avoiding social interaction and self-improvement. And it is the plot. It is Wolverine showing up at his doorstep that pushes him back toward the path of being the Professor X that we know. In X-Men First Class, Professor X is not very likable. He's pretentious, he's full of himself. Although well-studied, he's totally a dick, prejudiced, and a misogynist. He is 100% an asshole of the time. And he remains an asshole, and in fact has become full-blown junkie asshole in X-Men Days of Future Past. But in his struggles to help Wolverine with his quest to stop Mystique, he eventually speaks to his future self, future Professor X. And it is himself who gives himself the notion that he is running from his own pain, not the pain of others. That he must deal with himself. And he must understand that bearing pain is his actual power. Not reading minds, but the ability to bear the pain of others and help them keep moving. That is a special gift. And it is a most human gift. The gift a leader must hold to keep a team together, to save others. Charles Xavier goes through a massive transformation throughout this film. And that emotional transformation is the significance of much of this movie. But at the same time, we have Mystique, who has not yet killed. She has not yet gone down the path that we know her to be in the original X-Men trilogy, where she's already an assassin. She's already like Magneto and joined his brotherhood. The significant event of her life that takes her down that path with absolute certainty is killing Oliver Trask. And as Professor X must transform, so must she. Professor X must transform, or he cannot prevent her from doing what will cement her future as a miserable, sad assassin, working for a villain who will ultimately fail every time because Professor X just has a better team. It's a sport. Terrorism, counterterrorism. Who's going to win? Hopefully the counter-terrorists every time. In the case of X-Men, they win a lot. So good job, X-Men. Good job. Mystique's storyline carries over Magneto's storyline. Magneto is cemented in X-Men First Class. That is what drags that film down. That Magneto is cemented and we do not get to see his arc. His arc is so important, and his story and his arc are left behind for the sake of building up the X-Men, which ultimately really was not necessary. I do not care for the building up of the other X-Men characters. I really feel we should have seen the slow story of degrading Magneto to the point of his convictions that we know him to have. He's already decided that is what he is, and whatever. But in the case of Mystique, I feel this is course corrected. While we keep the Marvel action and the entertainment and the style, all of that is still there. Mystique is building towards something that she knows she wants to do. But when we get to the finale, Mystique does have interactions with Magneto, in which Magneto is clearly bent on killing all regular human beings. But Mystique feels that specific targets are far more effective than general terrorism. And this small conflict, although it's really just between the two of them, aids in expressing her character's transformation. By movie's end, she's about to kill Oliver Trask. However, she and the presidential cabinet and Oliver Trask are all together when Magneto drops a fricking stadium around the White House and essentially traps all of these people together and puts all of their guns up to their own heads and prepares to wipe out the president and all of his men. And Mystique. And Mystique, spoiler alert for those who have not seen it, by this finale, when all the guns are trained on the president and his men, the president steps in front of everyone, and it is such a moment of heroism. Who would expect this in today's time? The president steps in front of everyone, and Magneto decides to make an example. And at this moment, the president transforms back into Mystique and shoots Magneto in the neck with a carbon bullet. This stops Magneto. She knocks him out, turns around, and points her gun at Oliver Trask. Now at this moment, Magneto has turned all the cameras to face this event, intending to make a statement to the world that mutants are unstoppable, and you might as well let us be. This moment would be far worse and make the future far more bleak if Mystique pulled the trigger. Everything that Professor X has been trying to say, what you're doing is going to take the entire world down a horrible path in which we cannot undo, except for this moment. And they have a previous discussion where he visits her mind while she's getting on a plane, where he tells her she must come home. Now the dialogue, I don't think, is exactly ironclad perfect, but it gets along essentially Mystique's feelings that both Magneto and Professor X are just trying to control her, and she must find her own path. Professor X hears this, and in the finale, tells her, look at where we are. Pay attention. Take a breath. This is an important moment in your life. We can either keep doing what we're doing, which we see every day is not working, or you can put the gun down and just go home. But this time, he says the choice is yours. He speaks to the inner conflict he feels is there, and as a psychic, he knows is there. And in this moment, Mystique, all eyes on her, makes a choice. And she puts the gun down. And the post-apocalyptic future simply dissolves away. This is art. This is what it's all about. The function of the superhero. The function of the superhero is to be an allegory, a biblical tale that can be spoken to children and to adults to discuss moral issues. Oliver Trask is guilty of illegal human experimentation on mutants. He has murdered and mutilated many mutants, the friends of Mystique from First Class. She has every right to feel vengeance. She has every right to seek justice. And I feel most people would feel she was completely justified in getting this revenge. But the point of this movie is that hindsight is 20/20, and if she truly had achieved her revenge, that event in front of the whole wide world would cement that mutants are dangerous and not to be trusted, and ultimately destroy everything that both Magneto and Professor X want, which is the safety and prosperity of mutants. That this movie is saying that no matter how justified you may feel, to resort to violence, to resort to self-righteous, vengeful violence, does not solve the problem. In fact, it is the problem. The film asks you, the audience member, not to react to your problems with self-righteous justification. It asks you to think of the big picture and do the right thing. In this moment, Mystique had saved everyone. In essence, a mutant stopped another mutant in front of the world. And here she is, about to commit the very crime she just prevented because of her own philosophy. There were a few reviews that had said this movie is just about a woman deciding between two men. But at the end of the film, she does not choose either one. She chooses what she truly wants. What Professor X is there for is to help her figure out what that want is. Not to judge her, because he does, he has. He is one of the contributing factors to why she is this way, because he did not accept her in the first place. His rejection of her, back in First Class, runs a core root through her consciousness of who she feels she is. And that this following Magneto is a resistance to that deep internal feeling of not being good enough for someone that you love. Someone that should be a family member and should love you has always rejected you for something that you cannot control being. And that rejection led her down a path of violence because this person accepted her, so long as she prescribed to his version of justice, which ultimately is a perversion, and is ultimately more like the enemy of the Nazi than like the hero that he imagines himself to be. So this moral quandary, it is the question of everyday life. What is the consequences of our violence? Even if it may seem justified now, it may have dire consequences far down the road. The story asks you to challenge the revenge plotline, to challenge the notion that the self-righteous anger is righteous anger, to ask the difference. It does not give us the Hollywood easy answer of just shoot the guy who will do the bad thing, for his actions are exposed and he is put away. But the moral quandary is the significance of this film and what makes it a true superhero film. A character with a moral choice, justified in her anger, justified in many degrees with her self-righteous mission, What is the decision she is going to make? Batman Begins explores this also. Batman, in Batman Begins, before he's Batman, while he's still Bruce Wayne, has a moment where he wants to shoot the man, Joe Chill, who killed his parents. Unfortunately, the plot allows for someone else to do it for him. But he is rife with despair and not getting his revenge. And he is presented with the moral quandary of killing a farmer who had killed his neighbor. However, this does not work quite as well, because he does not know the farmer, and he may have some natural fear of or disagreement with killing someone who he does not know himself, who he has not determined himself the severity of the crime, and there has been no trial. Rachel Dawes exists as his moral compass, his Jiminy Cricket, that keeps him noble, that keeps him the Batman that we know. Days of Future Past gives Mystique a full motivation to do what she's going to do. When Batman chooses not to kill the farmer, it's not really that surprising. We only saw that guy once. Even the audience doesn't really care if he lives or dies. He's just some fictional side guy. But in Days of Future Past, when Mystique must make that choice, it is a choice. Because she knows this man killed and mutilated her friends. She knows it. She knows his inventions will bring destruction to her race. She knows it. She has every reason to feel that what she's doing is the right thing to do. But it is the intellect that challenges the id, that says, I know you feel what you're doing is right, but you know there will be dire consequences to this choice. You know it. The little voice in your head and heart is telling you what the right thing to do is, and she must make that choice herself. And her choice to do the right thing, that is the part that is for the children, that is for the adults who like the allegory. This is the importance of the superhero. When you look at Spider-Man, he had a moral quandary as well. Should I stop this robber who just robbed my boss? Why is that my business? He did not rob me. The very same robber kills his uncle. So we see the point of these stories. And Spider-Man, X-Men, both created by Stan Lee, both children of the 60s. The point of the hero is the moral quandary. The point of the moral quandary being examined is to teach us how to be better people. You see, art has a function in its center. Many people who consider themselves pragmatic may say that art is not important. To that I say, these people have no fucking clue how much art is in their lives. A stop sign, the choice to have the color red for a stop sign. Red is eye-catching. That is why it is red. There is a discipline and a craftsmanship that makes that stop sign effective and makes people stop from crossing intersections too quickly. And how many times do people fly through stop signs and red lights and hit others? Every time. Almost every time. And when you read a book, when you examine the Bible and these moral quandaries, someone wrote these stories. Someone understood cause and effect. Someone understood morality versus immorality and told these stories in such a way that they would have an effect on you. The craftsmanship of this, the use of language, is artwork. Whether it is the Bible or Quran, whether you are Buddhist or not, whatever your creed may be, artwork is in the usage of a language to communicate something. That is what artwork is. Whether that language is colors, pictures, words, symbols. The communication of a notion from one person to another, be it a stop sign or be it Dante's Inferno. Understanding these moral quandaries affects our life in public and affects how we choose to approach scenarios. For when we see the stories of others in films, it makes us change our minds about what we think a life should be. Think of YouTube and the boom of these self-care people, these workout people. There is the do-it-yourself movement, and how do-it-yourself has expanded immensely on YouTube. YouTube is a huge resource for people improving themselves. And what do they use? Video editing, color, music. The application of art affects your life every single day, be it your moral decisions or your amoral basic life decisions. How you dress when you go to work, how you dress when you go to a date, how you dress when you get married. Art is an intrinsic part of your life. The films you watch, the shows you watch, influence the way you think about things. When you choose to listen to someone, that is a choice. But how that message is delivered to you, that is the art or not art, whatever it may be. The inventions in science fiction films influence the cell phone and technology that we have today. Art imitates life, life imitates art. The young boys and girls, and everything in between, who watch Star Trek and Star Wars now, will be inspired by the technology and come up with engineering and evolutions in technology that will take society to the next level of decadence. Everything inspires everything. We are in a circle, and art is an integral part of that circle. It is said that the Spartans, who are famous for 300 Spartans fighting off 10,000 soldiers for over 3 days, that's an impeccable feat. That is an impeccable feat. Choosing your location and knowing your battleground. That is an impeccable feat. It is said that the Spartan soldiers were trained in art and comedy. Why? Why would they be trained in art and comedy if their job is to die? What is it about art and having a sense of humor that has anything to do with killing other people? It's about maintaining some level of humanity. Why would that be important to bring that to the battlefield? You must ask yourself this. Art is the expression of feeling. And that feeling influences your life and how far you can go. The importance of the superhero is the very importance of art itself. That we should strive to find out who we are. And that ideally, in finding ourselves and finding peaceful, diplomatic solutions to our problems, will be the key to having a brighter future for others, including ourselves. That fixing ourselves, in essence, is a way to fix society. It all starts with these moral quandaries, one at a time. How we react to what happens to us in our lives. Let me cite the Critical Drinker, whose review of Star Trek Discovery as infantile, emotionally infantile, aimed for emotional infants. I agree with this statement. The decisions made by the J.J. Abrams verse of Star Wars are rushed and entertaining, and don't really examine the moral quandaries. But Critical Drinker's finest point is about how adults behave in the original Star Trek films versus the new films and shows. That as Admiral Kirk in Wrath of Khan, we see the older generation of Star Trek people, these characters, when faced with conflict, have conversations with each other, and they do not lash out. They have conversations with each other and do not lash out. They have self-respect and respect for the person they're talking to. That this is a higher ideal and an older way of thinking that has been lost amongst modern entertainment. Modern entertainment teaches us that our mob mentality, that our self-righteous feelings are the purest and truest feelings. But when you look at the destruction that mobs cause in their righteous anger, what is improved by the angry, self-righteous person who believes that their opinion must be heard more than others? Everyone must be heard. Mystique did not feel heard by Professor X in her younger years, allowing Magneto's twisted philosophy to twist her as well. But when given time to reflect, and truly slow down in the moment, the maximum climactic moment of her emotional self-righteousness, when being allowed time to breathe, and allowed the choice, she chose the right thing. And Bolivar Trask went to jail for his crimes. Now, this is not always what will happen in real life, but the importance of the superhero is to get us to improve our real lives, that every single conflict we solve with diplomacy over violence is something that betters our society, not just ourselves. That the point of the superhero is to get us to make correct choices in life. That is why we crave these heroes. There is a religious element, of course. We love worship. Obviously, you see superheroes all over my room. Now, this is not just some man-childish obsession, but I love to be immersed in my favorite art, and I love to be immersed in all the notions and the stories and the allegories. No different than someone who religiously loves the Bible and has statues of Jesus and Mary and Joseph and worships them and prays to them. I may not pray to these things, but they represent my own personal struggles, and they represent my own values. And I appreciate their stories, which reflect my life. The self-reflection is the purpose of the art, and the purpose of the superhero is to reflect our moral difficulties. And in that regard, X-Men Days of Future Past wins every time. It truly should have been the finale, with Logan being the denouement. But unfortunately, they had to make Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, and, well, thankfully, Disney bought Fox, and that's the end of that. But that being said, I love X-Men Days of Future Past. It's entertaining. But the character work is what makes it so strong. Seeing Professor X struggle all the way to the very end with his addiction and conquer it through self-determination and the help of a friend who calls him out on his addiction. That is real-life stuff, too. Heroes should represent us. Where we are now, where we've been, and where we're going. That is the function of heroes. Not to just be stoic, solid, tough guys, but to be emotional and to carry the burden and show us how a burden should be carried and how to carry ourselves through dark times. I appreciate First Class for showing us a little bit of John F. Kennedy. We should do things not because they're easy, but because they are hard. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. These are values that make strength, to hold the community together, to ask what the community needs before yourself. And that may be someone who needs your help. The question is to those who have the power to help and to shape. If you have that power, then it's your duty to do so. You may have that power in smaller ways than you can even imagine. But if you find that way, then you have made life better for someone. If you improve yourself, you will be improving someone else's day by the time you interact with them. So those are my thoughts on X-Men Days of Future Past. Slightly pretentious, but I just feel that it represents the function of the superhero and what we should look for in our own life, the choices we should make. Thank you for watching. Remember, don't like, don't subscribe, and don't comment. I have been the Salawag, and this is my gut reaction. Indeed, my gut has quite an intellect, wouldn't you say? Very insightful. Oh, yes. I think me and my gut are going to have a good night together tonight. Oh, yeah. What's up, gut? What is up? That is the end of my terrible Alan Watts impersonation. Thank you very much, and good night.